Hi, hello, and welcome to the Podficer baton. So, we will be reading Traffic Light Trio by It's Livy Bear, and this is Chapter 5, Lunch and Redacted. Before me with Chapter 4 is Lovegood, and after me with Chapter 6 is Once Upon a Tea Time. And on with the story. The rest of the second school day up until lunch was pretty normal. They had a free period during the third block, but Izuku used it to do homework, much like the rest of the class. Math with ectoplasm, his cloning quirk was so cool, Izuku couldn't wait to see it in action. Had shown that UA was not playing around. They already had homework assigned on the first day, and while yes, it was mostly to review to make sure people remembered things, their teacher wasn't pulling any punches. According to All Might, Aizawa sensei would be reviewing the battle trials with them after lunch, and Izuku was pretty excited. They hadn't talked much after each person's match, only declaring the MVP and moving on with the little criticism. Speaking of battle trials, Izuku was keen to try out some of the things he had discussed with Kirishima and Kaminari before. Now that he had time to think about it and had seen their quirks in combat again, after he finished his homework, he grabbed a notebook and began scribbling some of his ideas before they left his head. They didn't seem to mind his analysis before, so hopefully they wouldn't mind him offering suggestions. Finally, after an English class with Present Mike, they were dismissed for lunch, and he grabbed his notebook and pencil along with him, eager to ask more questions and to try and test things out. So, Middlebury, you were totally awesome in the battle trials. Kirishima scratched the back of his head sheepishly. I thought we were doing okay until Shoji just overpowered us. Oh no, you guys did great. You were in the infirmary when I told Kaminari, but oh man. Zuko blinked at the blonde in between them. Sorry? Did I say something wrong? He gave a sigh and shot him a wry grin. You called me Kami earlier, but I guess it didn't stick. He stopped in shock for a moment before going beet red. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize. Are you sure you don't mind? The electric boy chuckled. I've called you Mido since day one. If I minded, I'd be a huge hypocrite. Izuku nodded haltingly. Right, so as I said to Kami, the blonde shot him a thumbs up and a grin. Just like earlier. You two took on Ojiro and won. Considering you don't really have any combat experience aside from throwing punches with wild abandon, you guys did super well. Plus, in that whole fight, you worked together like you've known each other all your lives, making up for each other's weaknesses and playing into each other's strengths. Shoji came up with a good strategy to take you both out, but you guys did really well. Kirishima grinned sheepishly. Well, if you say so, but what do you think we could have done better? Izuku's eyes lit up and he opened his notebook. So, this is just things in general, but I think we could all do better if we knew exactly how our quirks worked. For example, Kirishima, it wasn't close enough to really see, but does your arm harden to the same structure when you harden it, or is it different every time? Because if it's different, you could probably neutralize many enemies by getting close and then hardening your hands around them like handcuffs. Or, but more literal. Oh, but we could probably really work on close quarters combat because then you're really close to the enemy. He tapped a note on the page before rounding on Kaminari. What metal was the pole you used made out of? I think aluminium. Yeah, that sounds right. He pursed his lips and scribbled a note. Not the most conductive metal, but it's a good one. If you decide to use another metal weapons in the future as a way to conduct electricity, maybe some kind of metal knuckles and fingerless gloves. He scribbled again. Then I would see if they could give you a silver or copper. They aren't as sturdy as aluminum, but they conduct much better and it could help you with rationing your powers. I still want to go back to the battery idea from earlier though. If you could store your power, you could potentially use it in bigger bursts and maybe it wouldn't short circuit you. Or you could use the batteries to power the other weapons or tech. Yeah, that's true, you could. He trailed off, and the three of them turned to face the fourth person who had come up and injected themselves into the conversation without them noticing. She smiled and continued. You have some really fun ideas here, Hero Course. We should make babies together. Zuko sputtered, blushing, creeping back in full force. What? He managed to strangle out. She blinked once before smiling again, holding out a hand. Hatsuma Mei, future CEO of Hatsuma Industries. You should stop by the support lab sometimes so I can show off all my babies. He slowly started to connect the dots as he shook her hand nervously. Nothing the grease stains on her uniforms or lack of one. She was in a black tank top and what looked to be a lower half of her gym uniform. The top part tied around her waist. Support lab, inventory, babies. Oh, you mean your inventions? She nodded eagerly. Yeah, I mean it though. You have some pretty neat ideas. I'd be happy to help you test them out. Zuko glanced back at the other two, who had managed to somewhat recover from their shock. Well, we were planning on testing a few things. Great! She didn't let him finish. See you after school, Hero Course. Oh, and you two as well, I guess. With that, she bounded off, leaving the three boys in a stupor as they tried to process what had just happened. Wait, she calls her inventions babies, right? She doesn't want to make actual babies with Miro, right? Kirishima was the first to recover. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, we're still 14 after all, and I guess this works. We're already planning on testing, and I guess a support course student would be able to help with that. Yeah, Zuko nodded slowly. Plus, she probably has a lot of equipment that I would want to try and get to test things anyway. So this actually makes it easier. Kaminari sighed and kept walking, stepping into the cafeteria. When had they gotten there? Well, I'm starved. All this thinking is making my brain hurt. Kirishima growled. You thinking? Hey! Mina ended up joining them for lunch and almost fell out of her chair laughing when they told her about the previous encounter. Kaminari took the opportunity to complain viciously and call her a bad friend, but he totally joined in when she started poking fun at Izuku's reaction to her "let's make babies" comment. But that was totally justified. The only crushes he got were new quirks that he wanted to analyze. It's not his fault he didn't talk to many girls. When he pointed that out, Mina just said that he seemed fine talking to her, but he just shrugged. She felt more like a big sister than anything, so she was really easy to talk to. She cooed and squealed and declaring she would be the best big sister ever. They spent the rest of lunch talking about the battle trials again. Mina still raving about how he could deadlift her. It's really not that big of a deal. Yeah, but you weren't even using your quirk. Kaminari choked on his food. That was without a quirk? Dude, how strong are you? Kirishima whistled. That's crazy. You must have been working for years to get that buff. He scratched the back of his head. I only really trained for 10 months. Mina threw her hands up with a disgruntled groan before slamming them back down on the table. This sucks. What do you mean? She sighed and slouched. I can't call you Green Bean now. You're too strong to be a bean. Kaminari grinned. Nah, you still can. I mean, I won't stop. Neither will I. Zuko put a hand to his chest in mock betrayal. And here I thought I had friends for the first time since preschool. The air stilled, and they all slowly looked at him. What? What did I say? Oh my god, is this where they scoff? Friends? Yeah, right. Who would want to be friends with a Deku? Mito, you haven't had any friends since preschool? He blinked at Mina's hiss. Not really. People thought I was weak and weird, and no one really wanted to hang out with the quirky kid. Kaminari and Kirishima glanced at each other at that slip. Mina barreling on. Who wouldn't want to be friends with a cute and sweet guy like you? That's it. Time for me to come into the big sister role. Tell me who hurt you, and I will have a nice chat. He waved his hands to try and stop her. No, Mina, it's really not that bad. Plus, I have you guys now. And that's all I could ask for, really. He folded his hands in his lap and frowned at them. You really are different than everyone else. It's nice. This time, Mina joined in on the glance. They came to a silent agreement. No one was going to hurt their green light again, and if they had to fight the world, they would do it. He had already shown a lack of self-confidence, but they would be damned if anyone contributed to it. First, though, they had to get him distracted out of this mood. So, Dr. Mito, now that you've seen my quirk in action, any other tips to add? He looked up, dull eyes lighting up, and he smiled softly. Yeah, based on what I saw, you can control your acidity and viscosity, which we already knew, but it looks like you have a limit on both, or at the very least, acidity. That means your body is probably very acidic on its own, but I'd need a sample to really see that, and you'd have a limit on how much acidity you can use before the stuff you secrete becomes more and more basic until it's basically just water. I don't know if it's the same for viscosity though. We'd need to run more tests, but it shouldn't be too hard to increase your limit. And it feels like so much that if you poured all your acidity into something small, you could probably melt through anything, and incredibly fast. I also don't know how solid you can get your acid, since you keep it pretty liquidy for the most part. But anything too solid would have a hard time getting out of you, so perhaps that's for the best. The bubblegum-colored girl grinned, and Kirishima shot her a thumbs up under the table. Dr. Mita strikes again. I'd have to do some testing when I get back from dance. Still, Mito, it's really crazy that you can break down quirks like this. I'm super impressed. If you get any faster at this, you might be able to do this in real time in a fight, figuring out a way to beat your opponents in no time. Yeah! Kaminari shot a fist in the air. Keep using your crazy brain, Mito. But, maybe use it to help me with math too? Zuko and Kirishima laughed, Mina quickly demanding he help his big sister too. He agreed, and they wandered back to class, food eaten. He really had friends. It was a nice feeling. But a nagging voice in his brain that sounded a lot like Bakugo told him it wouldn't last. Critiquing the battle trials boiled down to a lot of work on your quirk or work on close combat. That one was a bit more common than the first one, since a lot of people relied on their quirks. Still, it took up all of 5th period, and then midnight came in for modern hero art history. It was day 2, and she was already assigning them an essay. The topic didn't seem too bad, at least, but after class ended, Kaminari and Mina wept comically, clutching each other. Despite not having met before school, the two became fast friends. They were practically inseparable at this point, and the thought made Asuku laugh a bit. Are you laughing at our pain, Mito? How could you? No, I just thought of a joke, honest. They briefly disentangled themselves, and Mina looked excited as she said, Well, tell us. Izuku blushed. It really isn't that funny. It made you laugh, Kaminari countered. So let us be the judge of that. Fine. What do you call Kaminari without Mina? They immediately grinned, but their brows were furrowed. What? Kari? They blinked, and Kirishima popped his fist on the other palm. Oh, because Izuku slapped a hand over his mouth, still watching the two with a poorly concealed grin. No, let them figure it out. He dropped his hand when he felt Kirishima grin behind it, and they both watched as the two turned to confer with each other before Mina groaned, but she was smiling. Kaminari. If you take out Mina, it just becomes Kari. That's it. When I'm gone, we will have to call you Kari. But Mina, he pointed out, how would that work if you aren't there to see it? Kirishima and Izuku just laughed from the sidelines as she pouted. True. Then tell you what, if I ever call you that, it'll be because we're no longer friends. He gasped in shock, offended. No! Mina, you said we'd be friends forever! She placed a hand to her brow as she grabbed her backpack and started heading out the door. Alas, what need do you have of me when you have Kiri and Mido? I shall take my leave, O Kari. No! He fell to the ground dramatically as she left with a giggle. Right. Kirishima grinned. If you're done, I think we have an appointment with support. Kaminari shot off the floor instantly, brushing himself off and grinning at Izuku. That we do! Mido still has to help that girl make babies, right? Izuku grabbed his backpack and hurried out the door, ignoring the blush that was creeping up his cheeks. Knocking on the door to the support lab proved unnecessary, as Hatsume pulled the door open before they could, dragging Izuku aside. The other two could only follow after, chuckling all the while. Hi again, Hero Course. You said you wanted to test some things to do with electricity, right? Here, use this. She shoved a doodad in his hands, and he blinked. But she already had turned back around to root around in a bin beside what appeared to be her workbench. She pulled out a long wire that split into two, ending in a black clamp and a red clamp, and then another wire with only one clamp. She tossed them at Kaminari before opening a drawer and pulling out a sheet of... Holy shit! What did she have? Electrodes. Yellow hair is the one with the electricity quirk, right? Izuku nodded before realizing she wasn't looking at him and was setting up a laptop. Yeah, that's Kaminari. Yo! So, she turned around with a flourish, hitting the enter key as she did so, facing the group with a smile. What do you want to test? Izuku looked at Kaminari, who just shrugged, while swinging a little. I guess we wanted to test the natural flow in his body. It seemed to go through his brain, which would be bad, and I kind of want to know if he runs on alternating or direct current. Testing if he can take in electricity would also add merit into the battery idea if we ended up not wanting to. As you said, use the batteries to power the weapons of other tech. Hatsume? What did you hand me? She grinned. Kamime, Hero Course. You have a heavy-duty battery in your hands, but I can check if the current thing is super easily. I just need these. She flapped around the sheet of electrodes. How are you going to do that? She grinned in response before plugging one end of the wires, not the end with the clamps, into her laptop, then dragging Kaminari over to sit in the chair. She pulled an alcohol wipe out of nowhere and wiped his palm, his forehead, and the back of his neck. He shuddered and looked at the other two, but they couldn't stop this now. May had already started, and they weren't sure if it was wise to get her to stop. Plus, it's not like she would hurt him, right? She whipped out a syringe filled with something a pale blue, and they all recoiled. She just squirted some gel on the other side of an electrode before slapping it onto his hand. She repeated this both for forehead and neck before finally clamping onto each of the metal protrusions. There, just keep doing what you're doing. She bounced back to the laptop and pressed the spacebar, watching eagerly as the little lines started moving across the screen. She tapped a few buttons and the jagged line zoomed out to see something resembling a regular sin graph curving up and down in a methodical manner. It looks like you have a natural current around 7 volts. Let me just... She tapped a few more buttons, isolating one of the 3 streams. I'm not getting anything special from your head, so I don't think you really have to worry about the brain thing. May whirled back around, grin never falling. Tell me everything about your quirk, generator. Kaminari gulped at the nickname, and the 3 of them shared a glance. They walked away from school a few hours later, Kaminari looking a little dazed. May had already started on support gear and to add to his costume, including the gloves Izuku had suggested to him earlier. She must have overheard. As well as some caltrops. You might not be able to shoot out lightning, she said, but your electricity will travel farther if it has somewhere to go, so toss these out and you'll get a nice current. She had also taken the battery from Izuku and thrust it into the blonde boy's hands, with telling him to take this with you and come back tomorrow with some extra charge, so they could fully test the battery theories. May had said there should be no reason why he wouldn't be able to take in extra power, but it wasn't something they had tested before, and they didn't want him to just drain the power from the building. Aizawa-sensei would not be pleased, and Mahima-sensei would probably ban me from the lab after hours, so they had opted to wait until they had the battery with some power in it instead. So, Kirishima trailed off with a quiet laugh. Eccentric. That's one way to put it, Kaminari muttered. It was really nice of her to help us test things out, Izuku smiled. Plus, since she's one of the people in charge of our costumes, you guys will be way better equipped faster than the others. I don't think anyone has made anything other than minor changes to their costumes. They approached the train station where they would split, and Kirishima suddenly jumped up. Oh, guys, don't forget the permission slips for that field trip Sensei was talking about. I wouldn't want to leave someone behind. Kaminari shot the other 2 a thumbs up, running to catch his train. See you guys later. Izuku smiled at his 2 friends, his phone with a few numbers heavier than it had been a week ago. Yeah, he could get used to this.